Victoria Grace was tired. She had been up since 5 a.m. The coffee machines had already started buzzing by the time the sun was barely peeking through the Brooklyn skyline. As she moved from table to table, balancing coffee cups and plates of freshly baked pastries, the weight of exhaustion hung over her like a heavy coat. The familiar hum of chatter filled Brooklyn Brew, a neighborhood cafe known for its artisan blends and the quiet corner where the regulars sat. Her sneakers squeaked across the checkered linoleum floor as she made her way to table 6. The morning rush was in full swing, and every seat was occupied. The usual crowd of office workers, construction workers, and longtime patrons all settled into their spaces, sipping coffee and chatting away. But there was always one person who caught Victoria's eye, the man in the corner booth. He was there every Tuesday and Thursday. A tall, imposing figure in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His name was Alessandro Moretti, but he never spoke much. He came in, ordered black coffee and wheat toast, left exact change with a generous tip, and observed the world around him with those dark, calculating eyes. It always felt like he saw everything. Victoria couldn't help but wonder about him. He didn't fit the usual profile of someone who would frequent Brooklyn Brew. He didn't belong to the neighborhood demographic, not like the rest of the regulars. Yet there he was, every week, always polite, always detached. She couldn't figure it out, and the mystery of him gnawed at her whenever she served him. Today was no different. As she placed a cup of coffee in front of a businessman at table 3, she caught a glimpse of Alessandro through the corner of her eye. He was sitting still, just as he always did, except this time, there was something different in the air. Something that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. She turned her attention back to her task. Focus, Victoria, she told herself. But it was hard. She was tired, she was stressed, and her mind kept wandering back to the quiet man in the corner. She caught herself staring at him again. You need to stop, she thought, shaking the thought away as she delivered an order to a table at the front. Miss, a voice broke through her thoughts. It was the businessman from table 3, holding up his cup of coffee. This is cold, he said, his tone dripping with annoyance. I'm so sorry, Victoria said, her heart sinking. Let me get you a fresh cup right away. He sighed dramatically. This is the 3rd time this week. Are you sure you know what you're doing here? Victoria's cheeks burned with embarrassment as the words echoed across the room. The usual hum of chatter seemed to die down for a moment as everyone in the cafe turned to look. She had been working at Brooklyn Brew for 2 years, and she'd always prided herself on her service. But lately, the long hours and double shifts were catching up with her. She was exhausted, and her patience was thinning. I'm really sorry, she said, trying to steady her hands as she reached for the mug. Let me make it right. Her boss, John Thompson, called from behind the counter, his voice cutting through the tension. Victoria, table 6 is still waiting for their eggs. Victoria nodded quickly. Coming right up. But before she could move, John stormed up to the front, his face flushed with frustration. His usual sour mood had only worsened over the past few days, ever since his wife filed for divorce and left him with nothing but a stack of debt. There's always a problem with you, isn't there? He snapped, his voice loud enough for the entire cafe to hear. Victoria flinched, but she tried to stay calm. John, I'm just getting a fresh coffee for table 3. No, John interrupted, his voice rising. You've been making mistakes all week, slow service, wrong orders, cold coffee. We're running a business here, not a daycare. The entire cafe seemed to fall silent, the clinking of silverware and the murmur of conversation dying down. All eyes were on her now. Victoria felt the blood rush to her face as her boss continued, his words sharp and cutting. I've had enough of this, John said, his tone venomous. You're fired. The words hit her like a punch to the stomach. Victoria stood there frozen, not sure whether she had heard him correctly. She tried to speak, to defend herself, but the words wouldn't come. She felt the weight of the humiliation crush her. Fired. In front of everyone. The silence in the cafe was deafening. All she could hear was the pounding of her own heart in her ears. You heard me, John said again, his voice final. Get your things and leave. Now. Victoria's mind raced as she slowly untied her apron, each movement feeling like it took a lifetime. She could feel the eyes of the customers on her, some with sympathy, others with a quiet, uncomfortable fascination. She walked toward the back room to grab her purse, trying to keep her composure. But as she passed the corner booth, her eyes briefly met Alessandro's. He wasn't reading his newspaper anymore. He was watching her, his gaze intense. Something about the look in his eyes sent a chill down her spine. She had the distinct feeling that he was seeing more than just the public humiliation she was going through. But Victoria couldn't process that now. She had just lost her job. Her hands shook as she grabbed her worn leather purse from the locker. She tried to breathe deeply, to collect herself, but it was hard. As she walked back through the cafe, she could feel the eyes on her once again. "You're a good girl, Victoria," Mrs. Patterson, an elderly regular, whispered as she passed. "Don't let him make you think otherwise." The kindness in Mrs. Patterson's voice almost made her break down. But she managed a small smile and a nod before pushing through the front door into the crisp October morning. Outside, the reality hit her. She had no job, no savings, and no immediate prospects. Her rent was due next week, and she had barely enough money in her bank account to buy groceries. She had no backup plan. But what stung the most wasn't the job loss. It was the humiliation, the feeling of being disposable. She walked aimlessly down the street, the weight of everything pressing on her chest. She didn't know where to go or what to do next. The neighborhood she'd come to love felt unfamiliar now, like a place she no longer belonged. As she passed a black sedan parked across the street, she noticed a figure in the driver's seat. Alessandro. His dark eyes met hers through the windshield, and for a brief moment, it felt like he was silently offering her something that could change everything. But Victoria didn't know that yet. She continued walking, unaware that her life was about to change forever. The next few days were a blur for Victoria. She spent most of her time in a fog, struggling to make sense of everything that had happened. She had walked out of Brooklyn Brew that morning with nothing but a few crumpled bills in her pocket and the weight of her humiliation still fresh on her mind. The apartment she was renting felt like a cage now. It was the only place she had ever felt safe, yet now it seemed suffocating. She spent hours scrolling through job listings, sending out resumes and applications, but with each rejection email, her sense of hope dwindled. The reality of her situation was inescapable. Rent was due, and she didn't have the money to cover it. Her car, which had been on the brink of breaking down for months, was still running, but she had no way to afford the repairs. Life had thrown one obstacle after another at her, and for the first time, Victoria wasn't sure how to overcome it. That's when the phone rang. "Victoria Grace?" The voice on the other end was calm, smooth, with a slight European accent. "Yes, this is she," Victoria replied, confused. "Who is this?" "This is Alessandro Moretti," the voice continued. "I believe we've met a few times at Brooklyn Brew." Victoria's heart skipped a beat. She had thought about Alessandro often since the incident at the cafe. The man who had been a silent observer, watching her without speaking a word. She hadn't expected him to reach out. "Yes, I remember you," she said cautiously. "How can I help you?" "I wanted to offer you something," Alessandro replied. "I saw what happened at the cafe. I also know that things have been difficult for you lately. I have an offer that might interest you." Victoria hesitated. She didn't know whether to be wary or curious. She didn't want to jump into anything without understanding what it meant, but something about his tone made her wonder if this could be the opportunity she had been waiting for. "What kind of offer?" she asked, her voice unsure. "I'm the owner of several high-end restaurants in the city," Alessandro explained. "I'm looking for someone to manage one of them. It's a big step up from what you're used to, but I believe you have the right qualities for it." Victoria was taken aback. A manager at a high-end restaurant? It seemed too good to be true. She had never even considered working in that world, but the promise of stability, of a life beyond the endless cycle of struggling jobs, was tempting. "I don't have any experience managing a restaurant," she said, the doubt creeping into her voice. "I've only worked as a barista." "I know," Alessandro replied smoothly. "But I've watched you, Victoria. I've seen how you handle customers, how you manage difficult situations with grace. I can teach you everything else." What you can't teach is instinct, and you have that. There was a pause on the line. Victoria's mind raced, her thoughts conflicting. Could she trust this man? Was he offering her a way out of her current nightmare, or was there something more to his offer? I understand if you're hesitant, Alessandro continued, his voice softer now. But think about it. A chance to rebuild, to be a part of something bigger. You've been given a raw deal by the world, Victoria. This is your chance to take control. Victoria was silent for a moment, weighing the words he had said. She had always dreamed of something more, something bigger. She had worked so hard to get where she was, and yet life had always pushed her down. Could this be her way up? What's the catch? She asked bluntly. No catch, Alessandro replied, his tone earnest. The job is yours if you want it. But it's not just about the job, Victoria. It's about the life that comes with it. This isn't just an opportunity to manage a restaurant, it's a chance to be part of something powerful. Victoria felt a chill run down her spine. There was something about the way he spoke, the way he framed the offer. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but she felt like this wasn't just a job. This was something more. Something she couldn't escape once she stepped into it. I'll need some time to think about it, she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. Of course, Alessandro said. Take your time. But remember, opportunities like this don't come around often. If you change your mind, call me. Before she could respond, he hung up. Victoria sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of his offer settling heavily on her shoulders. She had been waiting for something like this to come along, an opportunity to escape the cycle she was trapped in. But the question remained, what would this new world bring? Would it be everything she dreamed of, or would it drag her deeper into something she couldn't escape? As the hours ticked by, Victoria found herself walking the streets of Brooklyn, lost in thought. Her decision would change everything. She didn't know what Alessandro's world truly entailed, but she knew one thing for sure, it would never be the same after this. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized she was ready. Ready to step into the unknown. Ready to take a risk for something better. Ready to face whatever came next. The next day, Victoria woke up early as she always did, but this morning felt different. There was a new energy within her, a sense of possibility she hadn't felt in a long time. She had spent hours turning over Alessandro's offer in her mind, weighing the pros and cons, trying to understand the world he was asking her to join. Her fingers hovered over her phone, the number he had given her burning in her hand. She hadn't expected to make the call so soon, but deep down, she knew it was what she wanted. Victoria stared at the business card in her hand. The clean lines, the gold-embossed name, Alessandro Moretti, owner of several upscale establishments across the city. A businessman, yes, but there was something in his voice when he spoke about loyalty, about power, that intrigued her. She couldn't deny the truth, this was a chance for something better. A chance to leave behind the endless struggle of dead-end jobs and step into a new world. The phone felt heavier than ever as she dialed his number. It rang twice before he answered. Victoria, his voice was smooth, calm. I've been waiting for your call. I've thought about your offer, she said, her voice steady but with a hint of uncertainty. And I think I'd like to accept it. I'm ready to start. A silence followed, just a brief moment. But in that pause, Victoria felt the weight of the decision settle within her chest. She was committing to something unknown. She was stepping into a life she had only dreamed about. But what would it really be like? I'm glad to hear that, Alessandro finally said. I'll have everything set up for you. Come to Marone's downtown at 2 o'clock this afternoon. We'll go over the details and get you settled. As the call ended, Victoria exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. She had made the decision. Now, there was no turning back. By the time afternoon came, she was already at Marone's, an upscale restaurant located in the heart of Manhattan. The building itself was a towering testament to elegance. Classic brick, clean lines, with floor-to-ceiling windows that revealed an immaculate interior. The kind of place that always seemed out of her reach. A world she had never belonged to, but was now stepping into. The moment she walked through the doors, she was struck by the contrast to Brooklyn Brew. The ambience here was polished, sophisticated, Everything was meticulously organized. The staff moved with a kind of quiet precision, greeting each guest with practiced ease. Victoria felt suddenly out of place, but she forced herself to walk with confidence. A hostess, elegant and poised, greeted her as soon as she stepped inside. "Welcome to Marone's. How can I assist you?" she asked, her voice formal but warm. "I'm here to see Mr. Alessandro Moretti," Victoria said, her heart pounding slightly. "Of course," the hostess replied, her smile never wavering. "He's expecting you. Right this way." As she was led through the dining area, Victoria couldn't help but feel a growing sense of awe. Everything here was different. The gleaming silverware, the soft jazz music in the background, the patrons who seemed to belong to another world entirely. She tried to shake off the feeling of being an outsider. "You're here to work," she reminded herself. "This is your opportunity." At the back of the restaurant, Alessandro stood waiting, his presence commanding yet relaxed. He was dressed impeccably as always, in a tailored suit that made him look both powerful and approachable. His dark eyes flicked toward her as she entered, his expression unreadable. "Victoria," he said, his voice deep and steady. "I'm glad you could make it." Victoria nodded, forcing herself to keep her voice calm. "I'm ready to start. What do I need to do?" He gestured to a nearby table. "Please, sit with me. Let's talk about what comes next." As she sat across from him, Alessandro looked at her with a calm intensity that made her feel as though he could see straight through her. There was no judgment in his gaze, just a kind of quiet expectation. "I'm glad you decided to take this step," he began, his voice steady and confident. "You have something special, Victoria. I've seen it in the way you handle stress, the way you treat people. But this world, it's not what you're used to." He paused as though letting his words sink in. Victoria felt a pang of doubt in her chest, but she pushed it aside. She had made her decision, and there was no going back. "Here at Marone's," Alessandro continued, "we do more than serve food. We provide discretion. We make sure that the people who come here feel safe, that they can trust us. Your job will be to manage the front of house, to ensure everything runs smoothly and that every customer's needs are met. But there's more to it. You'll need to understand that sometimes discretion goes beyond food service." Victoria frowned slightly, not entirely understanding what he meant. But she nodded, trying to keep her expression neutral. "Of course," she said, her voice steady. "I can handle that." Alessandro studied her for a long moment before responding. "I'm sure you can," he said. "And that's why I chose you." The words felt heavier than expected, and Victoria couldn't help but wonder what else Alessandro was expecting from her. He stood up and extended his hand to her, his grip firm. "Welcome to Marone's, Victoria. You're going to do great things here." Victoria spent her first few weeks at Marone's adjusting to the pace, the expectations, and the undercurrent of something more that she couldn't quite place. The restaurant, though luxurious and sophisticated, held an intensity that was unlike anything she had ever experienced. The staff, highly trained and efficient, moved like a well-oiled machine, and the guests, from wealthy businessmen to high-profile individuals, treated the space as a private haven. As the new front-of-house manager, Victoria had been given full responsibility for ensuring that everything ran smoothly. She was in charge of reservations, greeting guests, managing the wait staff, and overseeing the general atmosphere of the restaurant. The job, though demanding, was fulfilling in a way that Victoria hadn't expected. For the first time in years, she felt like she was truly good at something. But it wasn't just the professional challenges that kept her on edge. There was something else about Marone's that Victoria couldn't shake off: the way people behaved in the restaurant, the quiet intensity that hovered just beneath the surface of every conversation. Alessandro had warned her, though he never explained in detail what he meant by discretion. She began to see it, little by little, through her interactions with the regulars. One evening, as she walked through the dining room checking on guests, she noticed the tension in the air as a group of men walked in. They were all sharply dressed, their movements purposeful, yet there was something about their presence that was unsettling. Victoria couldn't put her finger on it, but she could feel that they were no ordinary customers. She greeted them with her usual smile and professionalism, but as they sat down, she noticed the way they scanned the room. It was as if they were taking stock of every person and every corner. Their conversation was muted, and the clink of silverware seemed louder than usual. As the night went on, Victoria couldn't stop thinking about those men. She had seen people like them before, powerful, intimidating figures that moved through the world with a sense of authority. But these men, they were different. There was something dark in their eyes, something hidden that made her uneasy. That night, after the last of the guests had left and the staff was winding down, Victoria found herself standing in the back room, reflecting on the night's events. As she leaned against the counter, Alessandro walked in, his expression unreadable as always. "You're still thinking about the men from tonight, aren't you?" he asked, his voice soft but knowing. Victoria nodded, not surprised that he had noticed. "They were different," she said quietly. "What kind of people are they?" Alessandro's eyes narrowed, and for a brief moment, she saw something cold flicker behind them. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "They're regulars," he replied, his voice steady. "You'll get used to them." But Victoria couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. She had been working at Marone's long enough to know that the guests she dealt with weren't always what they seemed. But these men, they were more than just rich patrons. They were players in a world she didn't fully understand. The next day, her curiosity got the better of her. She took a risk and went into the private office at the back of the restaurant, where Alessandro kept his files. She had no real reason to be there, but something inside her urged her to take a look. The file she found wasn't like any she had seen before. It was thick with paperwork, and as she flipped through the pages, she came across names, addresses, and details that sent a chill down her spine. It wasn't just business information. There were references to debts, deals, and individuals who were connected in ways that went far beyond the world of fine dining. Suddenly, the restaurant didn't seem so glamorous anymore. The world she had stepped into felt darker, more dangerous, and she was starting to realize just how little she knew about the man she worked for. Alessandro's world was not just one of luxury, it was one of power, control, and secrets. Victoria quickly returned the file to its place, her heart racing as she walked back to the front. She couldn't let anyone know what she had seen. Not yet. She had only just begun to understand the full scope of her situation, but now, everything felt different. Over the next few days, Victoria tried to keep her head down and focus on her work, but the feeling that she was being watched never left her. Every conversation in the restaurant, every guest she greeted, felt like it carried more weight than it had before. It was as though the walls of the restaurant itself were closing in around her. Then, one afternoon, while she was managing a busy lunch rush, Alessandro came into the front of the house. His sharp gaze met hers, and for the first time since she had started, she saw something different in his eyes, an intensity, a seriousness that sent a shiver down her spine. "Victoria," he said, his voice low, "we need to talk." He led her to a private room in the back, away from the prying eyes of the staff. The door clicked shut behind them, and Victoria's heart began to beat faster. She could feel the weight of the conversation ahead. "You've been doing well here," Alessandro began, his voice cold and calculated. "But there are things you don't know. There are things you need to understand if you're going to be a part of this world." Victoria stood frozen, the words hanging in the air between them. She had thought she knew what she was getting into when she took the job, but this was something else entirely. Alessandro took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "You've seen the people who come through here," he said, his voice steady. "You've seen the deals that get made in silence, the transactions that happen behind closed doors. The world of business is not as clean as it seems. And now you're a part of it." Victoria felt her stomach twist in knots. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I mean that you have a choice to make, Victoria," Alessandro said, his tone unwavering. "You can leave now, go back to your old life, and pretend you never saw anything. Or you can stay, accept the reality of what we do here, and take your place in this world." The room felt like it was closing in on her. She had never signed up for anything like this. She had only wanted a better life, a way out of the cycle of struggling jobs. But now, she was facing a decision that would determine her future. Alessandro paused, watching her closely. "The choice is yours." Victoria stood in the dimly lit room, the weight of Alessandro's words pressing down on her. The decision lay before her, an unspoken challenge. Her heart raced, her mind racing with thoughts of what she had seen, what she had heard, and the world she had unknowingly walked into. She could feel the walls of the restaurant closing in on her, the glamorous atmosphere now tainted with a sense of unease. The elegant dinners, the polished servers, the hum of the soft jazz, all of it felt like a facade. Behind the smiles and expensive suits, there was something darker, something she hadn't signed up for. Alessandro was watching her closely, waiting for her answer. He had said she had a choice, to leave or to stay. The choice felt impossible. She had been so desperate for a way out, for something better. Now that she was staring the reality of that dream in the face, it didn't feel like freedom anymore. It felt like a trap. Her thoughts were interrupted by Alessandro's steady voice. "I want you to understand something, Victoria. This world, the world I run, it's not for everyone. It's a world built on loyalty, respect, and power. If you choose to stay, you'll be part of something bigger. But understand that it comes with a price." Victoria looked at him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "A price?" she repeated, almost to herself. "What does that mean exactly?" Alessandro stepped closer, his voice quieter but no less intense. "It means you'll be involved in things that are outside the law. You'll have to make choices, difficult choices. And in return, you'll have power. You'll have protection. But you will owe me. And I don't give that kind of power for free." Victoria's heart pounded in her chest. Protection. Power. She had always dreamed of a life beyond her struggles, but never in her wildest fantasies did she imagine it would come at such a cost. Could she really live with herself if she chose this path? Could she justify it? "Why me?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Why pick me for all of this?" Alessandro's gaze softened, just a fraction, as if he had been expecting the question. "Because you're different," he said. "You've proven that you have the instincts, the strength to survive. People like you don't come around often. I've watched you, Victoria. You're smart, you're capable, and you have a kind of purity in you that makes you rare. You belong here if you choose it." Victoria swallowed hard, her mind spinning. She had spent so much of her life feeling insignificant. But here, in front of Alessandro, she was being offered something more. Something that would give her control, power, and maybe even respect. But at what cost? The silence between them stretched for what felt like an eternity. Victoria glanced around the room, her thoughts racing. Could she really go back to her old life? Could she return to the endless cycle of struggling jobs and dead ends, always wondering what might have been? Or could she accept this world with all its shadows and uncertainty and forge a new path? Alessandro was still watching her, waiting for her decision. There was no going back now. She had crossed the line when she accepted his offer to begin with. This was the moment of truth. Victoria took a deep breath, her decision forming in her mind. She looked Alessandro in the eye, her voice steady but with a hint of resolve. "I'll stay," she said. "I'll accept this world, your world. But I need to know exactly what I'm getting into." Alessandro's lips curled into a smile, though it was tinged with something darker. "That's good to hear, Victoria," he said, his voice full of approval. "We'll make sure you're well taken care of. But remember, loyalty is everything. Once you're in, there's no turning back." Victoria nodded slowly. She knew she was making a choice that would change everything. There was no going back to the woman she had been before. But in that moment, she felt something she hadn't in a long time: purpose. "You're ready," Alessandro said, turning to leave the room. "I'll have Maria show you the ropes. There's a lot to learn, but I have no doubt you'll adapt quickly." Victoria stood still, the weight of her decision settling in her chest. She had crossed a line, and now there was no going back. But in the silence of the restaurant, as the sounds of the city filtered in through the windows, she realized that for the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving. She was moving forward. And as Alessandro disappeared through the door, Victoria knew that her life would never be the same again. She had made her choice. The world she had entered was one of power, danger, and loyalty. But it was hers now.